Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thank you so much for coming back to watch another Manhwa recap with me. I really appreciate you spending your time here, and if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my future videos. Today, we're diving into a really fun, steamy, and totally addictive manhwa called The Lewd Oppa Next Door. I can't wait to break it down with you, talk about all the drama, the tension, and of course, the romance that makes this story so irresistible. So grab your snacks, get comfy, and let's get right into it. It was a beautiful sunny day, and the main character was returning from class with her friend. Suddenly, her friend looked off to the side and asked Yuju if that was her older brother standing nearby. He was very handsome, so girls around often paid attention to him. Her friend was sure it was him. Yuju looked in the direction her friend pointed and said, yes, that was definitely her brother. The guy was staring at something on his phone while Juju's friend and said her brother was a total hottie. She started begging Juju to introduce them, but Juju really didn't want to. She never understood why girls found her brother attractive and usually tried to pretend they weren't even related when outside. She asked her friend to just leave. She didn't want to talk to her brother. She had enough of that at home. But then, her friend noticed someone else just as good-looking had joined him. It turned out to be Go Dojin. The girl couldn't believe that two gorgeous guys were standing that close, and Juju still refused to go over. In his suit, Go Dojin looked absolutely incredible. The two guys were tall and handsome like models. Juju's cheeks turned slightly red when she saw her neighbor. If we're talking about Juju's first love, we have to go back to the time when she had just started elementary school. One time she got scared because someone was standing outside their door, so she ran to tell her brother. Taeju was in the 4th grade back then. His little sister seemed annoying and was interrupting his video games, but she wouldn't leave him alone, begging him to come check the door. She thought it was their new neighbors and was dying to see them. The boy didn't care. That is, until they both froze at the sound of a voice behind the door, asking if anyone was home. Little Juju approached the door, cracked it open a little, and shyly asked who it was. And even though she was still a kid, she immediately understood one thing. Some people just look breathtaking. A very handsome guy was standing in front of her, holding a small rice cake and smiling warmly. He asked if her parents were home. Sometimes even the most illogical things can make your heart race, and it's hard to explain those feelings with words. He said he'd just moved into the apartment next door and wanted to greet them with a rice cake. Juju, stunned by his looks, suddenly blurted out that he was very handsome and stared at him with her mouth wide open. That's how her first love became Gu Do-hyuk, who seemed like the perfect man to her. But the 8-year age gap was an impossible barrier for them. Now, Gu Do-hyuk was a divorced man with a child, and the obstacles were even harder to overcome. Back home, Juju announced that she was back, but she found out her brother hadn't returned yet, probably out drinking with Go Dojin. Go Dojin, by the way, was Gu Do-hyuk's younger brother, the same age as Taeju and his close friend. Juju headed to the shower, still thinking about how surprised she was to see Dojin at the department this morning. In that suit, he looked like a gangster. The hot water flowed over her body as Juju admitted that he had become just as handsome as Gu Do-hyuk. Or maybe it was just the suit making him look that good. After the shower, she wrapped her hair in a towel, put up patches, and wondered why her brother still wasn't home. It was almost dinner time. She decided to call him and ask when he'd be back. Taeju was surprised and asked why she was even asking. Juju replied that it was already dinner time and she was waiting for him. That annoyed him. After all, he wasn't her personal chef. He told her she could make her own dinner. Juju started whining, and Taeju said she could just come eat at restaurant with them. Hearing that, Juju was surprised and asked if he really meant it. So Taeju said of course she could come, especially since Dojin was treating them tonight. Juju was delighted and said she'd get ready right away and join them. A bit later, Go Dojin asked why Juju had suddenly shown up at their table. So Taeju calmly answered that he couldn't let the kid go hungry. Juju, meanwhile, smiled happily and kept glancing at Dojin, and said they were both freeloaders. Taeju didn't mind the teasing and patted his sister's back, telling her to order whatever she wanted. Juju wasn't going to feel shy, so she called the waiter and started listing the dishes she wanted. Noticing Go Dojin's intense gaze, she asked why he was staring at her. Was he worried about the cost? But he smiled and said that wasn't it at all. He looked sinfully attractive in that suit. Resting his chin on his hand, he said he always imagined her as this little girl. When did she grow up enough to be drinking alcohol? Juju blushed a little. She was only 3 years younger than him, so she didn't see much of an age gap. Her eyes lit up at the sight of him in that suit. Why did it stir her imagination like that? She asked him why he was dressed like that. The next moment, Dojin took off his jacket, making Juju gulp. His shoulders looked so broad in that shirt. He said he'd been at his cousin's wedding. Juju thought back to her school days when she only cared about boys' faces. Now, she was completely mesmerized by a broad male chest. She stared as he loosened his tie. The guy noticed and asked if she really liked his suit that much. She couldn't take her eyes off him. Juju got flustered and didn't know how to answer, just kept staring at him. Taeju smiled and said he told his friend that girls love guys in suits. Taeju joked that if he wore a suit to university, all the girls would fall for him. Then asked if anyone was planning to get married soon. Dojin teased him, saying he should at least try wearing a suit first. Tired of the conversation, he said, "Forget it, just drink your glass." He was talking to Taeju, but Juju grabbed the glass instead and started drinking in big gulps. Everyone laughed and decided to get drunk together that night. A bit later, the apartment was littered with empty alcohol bottles. Juju was notoriously picky, so it was hard for her to find a guy who met her standards. But right now, it felt like she'd found the ideal of all ideals she could ever meet. Her hands gently rested on the man's chest. Seeing it just once, she realized she wouldn't be able to take her eyes off it. She couldn't tell whether it was a dream or reality. Even if it was real, she wasn't sure she'd ever get the chance to witness such beauty again. That evening, they got so drunk, the guys passed out, and the girl decided she no longer cared whether it was a dream or not. She just wanted to keep staring at that broad, masculine chest. Dojin was already asleep, only letting out the occasional heavy sigh whenever the girl's hands touched him. Morning came, and the sun was shining brightly through the apartment windows. Dojin's head was pounding, and through the haze, he thought it was way too hot. Maybe Taeju had accidentally turned on the heater. His hand found something lying on top of him, and for a moment, he thought it was a large dog. Cracking his eyes open, he saw it wasn't a dog at all. It was Juju, lying right on top of him, making his whole body ache. He sat up, head still splitting, annoyed, unable to understand why she was even near him. Dojin got up, fixing his shirt, and wondered how this girl could act so carefree. He went into the next room and called Taeju, saying it was time to get up. The guy said they all needed to head to class, so Taeju and his sister should go home to change. Taeju, feeling no better than Dojin, asked why he couldn't just get ready at Dojin's place. They were neighbors after all. But Dojin told them both to go home, because he still had to clean up the mess they made the night before. Dojin headed for the shower, hearing Taeju wake Juju in the other room, telling her they had to go to the university. Then he heard the girl shout that she was already late. Dojin turned on the shower water, thinking he must have overdone it. His head was killing him. But what was strange was that his chest was also sore. When he approached the mirror and saw what he looked like, he froze in shock. His chest and neck were covered in bruises and bite marks. He couldn't understand what had happened to him. It looked like a dog had attacked him. Then suddenly, a hazy memory surfaced. Juju, drunk, coming to him, and the feeling of her hands on his chest. The guy blushed and smacked his face, overwhelmed with shame. What the hell had that girl done to him? Meanwhile, students were happily leaving the lecture hall. Juju could barely move her feet. She felt awful. She told her friend she was probably going to head home. The girls said goodbye, cheerfully waving to each other. Suddenly, Juju got a text from Go Dojin. He was asking where she was. That was strange. He had never texted her out of the blue before. She replied that she was on her way home. She figured something must have happened if he was texting her. The girl was already near the exit when she suddenly saw a familiar figure. Dojin was standing by the gates, hood pulled low over his face. Seeing her, he immediately called out to her sternly. Juju hurried over and asked what had happened. Was something wrong with Taeju? But the guy replied that her brother was in class. Juju grew even more confused. It felt like he had something important to tell her, but he also looked irritated. After a few awkward moments of silence, the girl asked what was going on and what he wanted to talk about. Go Dojin gave a short laugh, pulled down his hood, pointed at the bruises on his neck, and asked if she could see what had happened to him. Juju was shocked. It looked terrible, to say the least. But she asked why she had to listen to some relationship drama from her older brother's friend. Dojin chuckled again and said he couldn't believe she didn't remember what happened last night. The girl stepped back and asked what he was even talking about. She was about to protest, saying there was no way she could have done something like that. But then, suddenly, she remembered the feeling of touching his chest, and shame washed over her. She didn't know what to say in her defense. The guy looked at her calmly and said it was good she finally bothered to remember. He grabbed her hand and said she was now obligated to follow him. The feel of his hand made her heart race. She was ashamed of what happened, and more importantly, it seemed like Dojin was seriously mad at her. When they got home, he dragged her so quickly behind him that they kicked off their shoes in a rush and went straight into the apartment. Juju tried once again to apologize, saying her memory was foggy and she barely remembered anything. But looking at her expression, Dojin thought there was no way she was lying. She really didn't remember. When the guy reached for the hem of his hoodie, Juju's face turned red, and she panicked. "What are you doing?" Dojin gave her a sideways glance and said he just wanted to help refresh her memory. When he pulled off his hoodie, the girl saw the marks on his body and let out a cry of horror mixed with embarrassment. She liked his figure, but was ashamed of what she'd done. The guy stood there without a hoodie, just as embarrassed, and told her to take a good look at her handiwork. Thanks to her, his body had been aching all day. Dojin asked if everything was okay with her. Why was she biting people like some kind of dog? The girl couldn't take her eyes off him and kept apologizing. He grabbed her chin, lifting her face to meet his gaze, and told her to look him in the eye. He asked if she seriously thought a simple "sorry" was enough after all that. Juju was completely captivated by the sight of his chest, so her apologies didn't sound nearly as sincere as she had intended. Dojin said that with a face like that, her apologies seemed fake. And anyway, why was she smiling? Did she want him to put her through the same thing she put him through? Juju had only seen the guy this mad once, right before the midterm exams. Taeju kept pestering his friend with questions about when he would finally get the courage to get closer to the class president. The girl didn't want to listen to their gossip, especially since they were blocking her view of the TV, so she rather rudely told them to leave and stop bothering her. Dojin told his friend that they shouldn't talk about such things in front of a child, and suggested they go outside. Taeju was surprised why his friend considered Juju a child. That time, Go Dojin had been staying over for 2 days in a row, because he and her brother were working on a joint project, and both of them were grumpy and utterly exhausted. Taeju tried to draw Dojin's attention to how shamelessly grown up his sister had become. Juju, however, told them to get lost already, saying they could work on their project at Go Dojin's place. Her brother decided to teach his sister a lesson and tried to start a playful fight, but due to sleep deprivation, he was clumsier than usual and accidentally knocked over a can of coffee, which spilled on the laptop. The problem was that the laptop belonged to Go Dojin, and because of the spilled coffee, it broke, along with the project they had worked so hard on. Taeju and Juju stared in horror at what had just happened. An ominous aura seemed to emanate from Go Dojin, and the friends froze, seeing him like this for the first time. Even though the guy stayed calm, he looked like he was ready to kill someone. Juju clearly remembered how long Taeju had to beg him for forgiveness that time. In reality, Go Dojin is a very good person, and both she and her brother are rather meek, so they aren't shy about apologizing when necessary. So Juju got on her knees, clasped her hands in a pleading gesture, and began apologizing, promising it would never happen again and that she didn't know what had come over her. After all, even when drunk, she'd never done anything like that before. She was sure the sight of her would melt his heart and he wouldn't be able to stay mad. She glanced at him and said, "She'd do anything he asked." Go Dojin remained motionless, taking deep breaths, and simply told her to stand up. He asked if he had understood correctly, that she wasn't the type of person who did stupid things when drunk. She replied that it was true. He said he'd forgive her this time, and only because it was her, but she must never behave like that with anyone else, or she could get into serious trouble. He said from now on, she should be more careful, and that he wasn't sure he could trust her the same way as before. The girl was relieved he forgave her so easily, and obediently nodded in agreement. Suddenly, Dojin asked what she would do if something like that happened again. But Yuju assured him it never would. But then her gaze drifted again to his broad, beautiful chest, and she thought she couldn't be 100% sure. So she cheerfully declared that if it ever happened again, she'd let him do to her what she had done to him. A vein pulsed on Dojin's temple in irritation, and he asked if she had completely lost her mind. 2 weeks passed, during which Yuju was essentially Dojin's personal servant, having to fulfill all his requests. And now, once again, he was bossing her around. The girl didn't like it, but she endured it so their conflict would be resolved. Taeju observed his sister's strange behavior and asked his friend what he'd done to make her so obedient. Dojin replied that he had no idea and told his friend to start packing his things. Yuju appeared and, with a sweet smile, said to leave the coffee for Oppa on the table. Her brother smiled and said he wanted coffee from his sweet little sister too. But Yuju made a rude gesture and told him not to even dream of it. Then Dojin only had to say her name for the girl to sigh in defeat and say she understood. To his credit, most of the guy's requests were just for coffee or small favors. For example, she had to wake him up every morning according to his class schedule. When she asked how long she'd have to keep doing his errands, he said until the marks on his chest completely disappeared. But by the end of the week, curiosity was eating her up. What if he had already healed and was just fooling her? Yuju couldn't bring herself to ask him directly, so she decided to check for herself while he was sleeping. But as soon as she reached for the buttons on his shirt, the guy immediately grabbed her hand and asked what she was trying to do. The girl blushed and panicked, embarrassed that she had been caught doing something like that. She didn't want him to think the wrong thing, but she also didn't want to admit that she just wanted to check the bruises. So she lied and said she was just trying to wake him up like he'd asked. But Dojin didn't believe her and got angry again, asking if she was drunk. She yelped at his outrageous assumption. This wasn't like that at all. Yuju sighed heavily, wondering why she couldn't summon the courage to just ask if his chest had healed. While she was making coffee and thinking her slavery might end soon, she overheard her brother talking to his friend. Taeju didn't understand why Dojin didn't want to go study abroad. The girl placed the coffee on the table and asked why he really didn't want to leave. After all, he only had to improve his grades a little and everything would work out. Taeju, who didn't understand what was going on, asked his friend why Yuju was so sweet to him but always rude to her own brother. Dojin looked up from his tablet and suggested that maybe it was because he was staying home while his friend was leaving for another country, leaving the sister behind. Yuju pouted and didn't understand why the guy didn't want to go away with his brother. After all, it was only for 4 weeks, during which time all the marks on his body would have healed, and they would have forgotten all about it. She didn't notice that Dojin was secretly watching her from behind the tablet. His cheeks turned red, and he thought the girl was still as naive and silly as ever. On Friday morning, Yuju woke up in the apartment completely alone. Her brother had already flown out. Suddenly, she smelled a pleasant aroma coming from somewhere in the apartment. She couldn't figure out what smelled so good. Then she got suspicious. Where could such a smell be coming from if she was supposed to be living alone for the next 4 weeks? She quickly rushed out of the room, thinking maybe her brother had forgotten about his flight and was cooking in the kitchen instead of leaving. Entering the kitchen, she heard a noise and immediately asked if her brother had forgotten about his flight today. But then froze when she saw a familiar figure in an apron. That sight definitely mesmerized her, and she could barely whisper. What was Dojin doing in her apartment? Seeing the dumpling, she exclaimed happily, then collected herself and asked again why the guy was in her kitchen. But Dojin just said it was already too late. So if she planned to have breakfast, she'd better hurry up, wash up, and change. Yuju couldn't understand why he was making her breakfast. It felt like she was dreaming some strange dream. Finally, she loudly said again that this wasn't the time for that. What concerned her was the fact that the guy was making her breakfast. Why was he doing this? Did Taeju ask him to? While setting the table, the guy calmly replied that, yes, Taeju had asked him to make sure his sister didn't starve to death while he was away. He didn't seem the least bit embarrassed. He finished setting the table and told her to hurry before the soup got cold. Juju, on the other hand, felt very awkward. They were alone for the first time, and in the same room, no less. Seeing all the delicious side dishes he had prepared made her mouth water, and she asked if she could eat first and shower later. Dojin sighed and asked why she was asking for his permission. It was her business after all. So the girl rushed to the table. Sitting down and overcoming her embarrassment, she asked if she had understood correctly. Would Dojin be cooking for her while her brother was away? The guy sat down across from her and simply said, yes. Juju then asked what about cleaning? Would he take care of that too? The guy smiled slightly and replied that cleaning was also his job, but the laundry would be Juju's responsibility. The girl was happy to hear that, as she was used to her brother doing such things for her. She sincerely thanked him for breakfast. When she tasted the first spoonful, she couldn't believe her taste buds. She exclaimed that it was incredibly delicious. She even jumped up and asked if he had really cooked it himself or bought it. Dojin replied that he had made everything himself. Juju praised him and said he was even better at it than Taeju. Dojin and Taeju study at the same university and in the same department, so they always hang out together after classes. Juju followed their example and enrolled in the same university. When Dojin found a place to live near the university, the girl found out that the apartment next door was available, so she signed the lease and she and her brother moved in. Juju was going to university and thinking about the fact that even though they had lived next door to each other for most of their lives, she felt uncomfortable knowing that now they were practically living alone together. She could call him the annoying Oppa in the neighborhood. They used to barely talk because they felt awkward around each other. They started talking more often after getting into university. She slowly put on her lipstick, suddenly realizing that this was the first time they had eaten alone together. The food and the marks on his body made her feel embarrassed. She tried to act like nothing was happening, but her heart kept pounding. If she were Taeju, Dojin would definitely be spending the night at her place. While the guy was washing the dishes after breakfast, the girl mentally hoped that he wouldn't make her serve him for all those 4 weeks. She wanted to discuss all this with him, so she called out. But Dojin suddenly asked, "Why haven't you left for class yet?" He asked if she wanted him to make her coffee. There wasn't a hint of a joke in his voice. Juju was touched by his care, but that wasn't what she wanted to ask. Her heart beating loudly, she asked if the marks on his chest had healed. Dojin took a defensive posture and asked why she was suddenly asking him that. The girl got flustered and said he misunderstood her. The guy crossed his arms and asked with a smirk if she was curious just to know whether her slavery was over. Juju gulped and objected that he misunderstood her again. Her heart kept pounding. She suddenly wondered, was he always this tall? Dojin kept smiling and asked, "Then what? Do you want to admire my chest again?" Juju held her hands out and said she was just worried about him and asked him not to stand so close. Feeling something firm under her hands, she realized she was touching his chest again and thought how broad and strong it was. But then she blushed from shame and quickly tried to explain. She didn't mean to do anything like that. She just wanted to push him away a bit. Dojin covered his chest with his hands like an offended maiden and said tensely that Juju was really something else. The girl quickly ran out of the apartment. She thanked him once again for breakfast and wished him a good day. Dojin sighed in relief, but then suddenly heard the girl's voice again. He grew worried. What had happened now? Juju came back to let him know that she had plans with friends in the evening, so she would be having dinner with them, and he didn't need to cook for her. The guy felt something unfamiliar. She looked so cute to him that his heart skipped a beat. He wondered, is this what older brothers feel? He was about to go back to the dirty dishes when he saw the handbag she had forgotten on the table. Juju was already putting on her shoes and about to leave when she heard his voice calling her. She wondered what he could possibly want. Dojin came over and tapped her on the head with her bag, saying she shouldn't be so careless. The girl thanked him in surprise. Then, suddenly, the guy asked who she was meeting. Girls? She smiled and said yes, she was meeting up with the girls from her group. He felt relieved and wished her a good time, her not to drink too much. The day was coming to an end, and the sun was slowly setting. Juju was having a great time chatting with her friends at a restaurant. She was drinking another glass when the girls started discussing the new guy at the university, saying he was incredibly handsome. One of the girls said she knew who they were talking about. His name was Sungmin. He was tall and very good-looking. Another friend said she was right. His name was Shin Sung-min. He had a lot of followers on social media and had mentioned he wanted to become a trainee. One of the girls nudged Juju with her elbow and said there's no way she didn't know who they meant. Juju looked confused and said, maybe she had seen him around. The girls giggled and said they had seen that guy trying to subtly sit next to her at the last department meeting. They were sure he liked her. Juju didn't remember anything like that and felt uncomfortable because of all the hints. So she honestly admitted that she wasn't interested in him anyway. Her friend told the girls that Juju wasn't the kind of girl who would fall for someone just because of their looks. She asked her friends if they had seen the girl's brother. In the IT department, there were two famous heartthrobs, real celebrities, and Juju's brother was one of them. The girl could swear that when she saw him recently, he was so handsome it was blinding. Juju was glad the attention had shifted to her brother, but suddenly one of her friends said she was sure he had a girlfriend. This surprised her. She took another sip of alcohol and said her brother didn't have a girlfriend. She was certain of it. The girls sighed with relief and said they knew you shouldn't believe the gossip spread in local student communities. Suddenly, a handsome guy with blonde hair approached them and happily said he was glad to see his seniors. Juju immediately recognized that it was Shin Sung-min, whom they had just been talking about, and she felt uneasy. The guy beamed and asked if she'd mind if he sat next to her. The girl stared at him silently, thinking that after what the girls had told her, it would feel awkward. Sungmin looked at the girl with hopeful eyes, not taking them off her. When Juju first started university, she was still getting used to drinking. So one day, something happened to her. She still smelled a bit of alcohol when she came to class the next day after the party. When she entered the classroom, she was surprised by how warmly and cheerfully everyone greeted her. Her friend was upset, asking why she had to learn everything from rumors and not from Juju directly. She was disappointed, and Juju didn't understand what she meant. She dumbly stared at her friend and asked what rumors she was talking about. The girl replied that the whole university was saying Juju and Suwon were having a fling and made a beautiful couple. Juju froze. She had no idea where these rumors had come from. It wasn't true. Later at home, she told her brother about it, and he asked again who the guy was. She said Suwon was a senior from her department. He was spreading rumors that something had happened between them. Taeju was ready to beat up anyone for his sister, so he demanded she give him that jerk's number. But Juju replied they hadn't even exchanged numbers. That made the rumors even more infuriating to her. Taeju was on edge and asked if the guy had lost his mind. He told his sister he didn't have any classes the next day, so he would go to the university with her. At that moment, Go Dojin entered the apartment. He wanted to ask if Taeju had finished his work, but froze when he heard the conversation. Juju said everything was fine and that she wasn't a child, but her brother objected, saying she was a 20-year-old child. Dojin asked what they were arguing about. His friend replied that he had just found out that some idiot was bothering Juju, so he declared he'd go to class with her the next day because he wasn't going to let that guy get away with it. He asked his friend if he agreed. Dojin thought for a moment and said that Juju wasn't entirely wrong, and that Taeju might be overreacting a bit. Her brother's overprotectiveness sometimes drove her crazy, so she thanked Dojin and said she could handle such problems on her own. She got up to leave and said the matter was no longer up for discussion. She thought that Dojin's cold composure unnerved her even more than her brother's overprotectiveness. She appreciated that her brother cared, but she didn't want him solving her problems all the time. She wanted to finally be seen as an adult. After all, she was no longer a child. Meanwhile, Go Dojin sat down next to his friend on the couch. Taeju asked him whether, even if he thought he was overreacting, he didn't think it was better to step in now before it was too late. Dojin said that he shouldn't have said anything to Juju at all. He didn't have classes the next day either, so the two of them could have just dealt with it together. Now, staring into her empty glass, Juju, her mind fogged with alcohol, realized she couldn't even remember what had happened after that day. She realized she had gotten drunk again and didn't feel very well. Sungmin was closely watching her and noticed she was no longer thinking clearly. A sly smirk flickered across his face, and a sneaky plan formed in his mind. He scooted as close to her as possible and spoke to her. Juju didn't like it. She felt uncomfortable next to him, but he leaned toward her ear and whispered that she had left her umbrella in the classroom and he had taken it. He said he had left it at his house and offered that she come over to get it back. Even though Juju was drunk and her mind was fuzzy, she felt that she didn't like being around this guy. She was even more annoyed that her friend Sojong had left her seat under the pretense of going to the restroom, letting the guy move next to Juju. Now she was discreetly encouraging her friend, thinking the two of them liked each other. But Juju felt creeped out. She couldn't understand why her friend didn't see the obvious. She wasn't interested in this guy. The girls were playing a drinking game called Rabbit Carrot. The loser had to drink. Juju kept losing over and over. And the more she drank, the harder it became to keep playing. Sungmin was carefully watching her. She had clearly drunk too much, but that only played into his hands. Earlier, when he invited her over, she had said it was fine. She'd get it later. Or he could bring the umbrella to the university. But the guy didn't give up, and trying to sound as charming as possible, said that it was going to rain tomorrow, so she should come over so she wouldn't get wet. But Juju replied that it wasn't necessary. She had plenty of umbrellas at home. It angered him that he couldn't manage to seduce her. Watching the girl hand Juju another glass, he wondered why the girl was so cold toward him. Were his charms really not working on her? The girl could barely hold the glass in her hands, so he offered to drink it instead of her, and the other girls approvingly said he was like a knight on a white horse. But Juju flatly refused his help and said she could handle it herself. Then she downed the full glass of soju cocktail in one gulp. Everyone at the table froze, and for a few moments, silence fell over the group. Sojong finally realized that maybe her friend didn't like the handsome guy at all, and that their efforts to match them up had been in vain. The other girls seemed to come to the same conclusion, and decided it was time to wrap things up, suggesting they all head home. Upon hearing that, Shin Sung-min put his arm around the now completely drunk Juju and asked her friends where she lived. He wanted to walk her home, but his behavior raised concerns among the girls. Even though they studied together, he was still almost a stranger, and his eagerness seemed a bit suspicious. Sojong quickly stood up and said his help wasn't needed since Juju lived nearby, and they would call her Oppa to pick her up. Meanwhile, Go Dojin was staring at his phone, growing anxious about why she hadn't come home yet. It was almost midnight. Then suddenly, his phone rang. He asked why she was calling so late, but he heard a completely different voice. A girl told him the name of a bar and said Juju was so drunk she couldn't walk. She asked him to come pick her up. The guy jumped up from the couch immediately. He ran so fast that he broke into a sweat. Entering the bar, he was out of breath. Juju's friends were relieved that Dojin came to get her. Meanwhile, the guy stood frozen at the unpleasant sight before him. He locked eyes with a guy who clearly wasn't happy about his arrival. And why was Juju sitting next to him, unconscious? Watching some guy with his arm around her, Dojin felt anger boil inside him. What the hell was going on here? Dojin gave the stranger such a cold stare that the guy immediately withdrew his hand from the girl. Kneeling in front of her, he anxiously wondered how she let herself get into such a state that she couldn't even open her eyes. He tried to wake her up, but she didn't respond. Realizing she was completely out of it, Dojin lifted her onto his back like she weighed nothing. Sojong handed him her friend's bag and thanked him again for coming to pick her up. She watched him walk away with Juju on his back when Sungmin quietly approached and said Juju's brother looked really intimidating. But the girl simply replied that he wasn't her brother. She explained that Juju's brother had gone abroad for a short time, and now his friend was looking after her. The guy was surprised and asked if it wasn't dangerous to let her go off in that state with another man. Wasn't it dangerous to let her go off in that state with another man? Sojong thought that he looked way more suspicious and dangerous, and now even more so. She answered that those two had known each other since childhood and were like family, but the guy stared thoughtfully after them, thinking it was impossible for a man and a woman to be just friends. In the end, everyone said their goodbyes and went home. When they got home, Go Dojin laid the drunk girl in bed and covered her with a blanket. He thought about how careless she was and how she could behave so recklessly. Then he remembered the guy in their group, and his anger and irritation surged. Didn't Juju understand what could have happened? He was mad at her for being so careless. Still, everything ended well, so he tucked her in and let her sleep peacefully, deciding to talk to her about it the next day. Closing the door to her room behind him, he exhaled deeply and wondered when Juju had grown up. She used to be so easy to handle. How had he not noticed how mature she'd become? He was worried about her habit of drinking more than she should, and the way she behaved afterward. He remembered the incident with his chest and blushed. One time, Juju had gotten really scared. It happened when she was a child. She had woken up at night after hearing a noise and thought it was her father, so she went out of the room and asked why he was still up so late. But it turned out a burglar had broken into their apartment. The event was so traumatic that even now, as an adult, she trembles when she's home alone at night. The robber was afraid of being caught, and unfortunately, the girl got hurt. Dojin was still little when he heard that the police had come to their neighbors because of a robbery, but he didn't know the details. Only recently, before leaving, Taeju told him that Juju had been injured. That's why he understood why her brother was so worried and didn't want her to be alone at night. Since he's gone, Dojin would have to stay overnight in their living room. Juju slept restlessly. She felt unwell and kept tossing and turning in her sleep. Sitting up, she felt a strong dizziness and didn't immediately understand where she was. Leaving the room and holding her throbbing head, she wasn't sure if she was still dreaming or if this was really happening. Suddenly, she saw a stunning sight. Dojin was lying on her couch, and his beautiful, broad chest was like a beacon. Juju decided she must still be dreaming. Just like a dog can't resist a juicy bone, Juju couldn't take her eyes off the guy's muscular chest. She decided that since this was a dream, it would be fine, so she climbed on top of him. Dojin was dreaming that a mosquito in the form of Juju was biting him, and he mumbled sleepily while trying to swat the annoying bug away. Morning came, and the guy felt a weight on his chest, as if someone was lying on him. Opening his eyes wide, he saw the girl sleeping on top of him and thought she was at it again. She must have gone crazy. There were marks on his body again. He started shouting for her to wake up immediately. Juju, barely hearing the yelling, slowly opened her eyes and asked what was going on. After a while, she finally saw Dojin's irritated face and realized she'd done the same thing as last time. She froze in horror, realizing that even though she had promised not to do it again, she had gotten drunk and messed up once more. A little later, while taking a shower, the girl anxiously thought about what she should do now. She scolded herself for her behavior. She had thought it was just a dream, and the moment she saw the guy's chest in the moonlight, she lost control. Juju suddenly remembered their agreement. If it happened again, Dojin would do the same thing to her as she did to him. Just thinking about it made her heart flutter strangely, almost in anticipation, and the girl grew scared. Why was she feeling such conflicting emotions? Go Dojin was like a brother to her, so why did she feel this excited thrill? She suddenly thought about how tall the guy had become and how big and strong his hands were. She wondered what it would feel like if he touched her. But then she quickly snapped out of it in horror. Such thoughts scared and embarrassed her. She felt like she was losing her mind. How could she even think such things? This was Go Dojin, the friend of her brother whom she had known since childhood. She was flustered and didn't know how she could even look him in the eyes now. A terrible truth dawned on her. Dojin was attracting her as a man. After a while, the girl was sitting in the living room, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. The guy ran a hand down his face and exhaled heavily, asking if she remembered what they had agreed upon last time. He was angry and said that he had made it very clear if something like this happened again, he would pay her back the same way. Juju sat there, burning with embarrassment, unable to believe she was actually about to face the consequences. She asked if he was really serious. Dojin looked just as embarrassed as she was, but he was also angry, so he said that he wasn't joking and that she had to honor their agreement. A little earlier, the girl came out of the shower and sat there looking guilty, burning with shame. She could see that the guy was truly very angry with her. His piercing gaze and silence made her incredibly nervous. Eventually, he made tea for both of them. And sitting across from her, he asked if she understood where her drinking habits could lead. Yuju tried to justify herself, saying she usually didn't drink that much. She tried to put on a pitiful expression so Dojin would feel sorry for her, and said that this was the first time in her life she had gotten this drunk, and that she didn't have any particular fondness for alcohol. The guy was clearly irritated and asked if she had done something like this with someone else before. The girl immediately replied that of course not, and that this was the first time something like this had ever happened to her. That only confused Dojin even more, and he asked what the hell was going on with her. Why was she suddenly doing this now? Could this be some weird fetish of hers? While the girl stayed silent, he said he was considering taking her to a psychiatrist. Yuju was incredibly embarrassed, but knew she had to give him at least some logical explanation. So she clenched her fists and started talking about her favorite actor. He had a broad, beautiful chest. Thanks to him, she realized her ideal type was a man with a muscular chest. Dojin crossed his arms over his chest and grumbled, asking if that meant any broad chest would do for her. But the girl objected, saying that wasn't the case at all. She began passionately explaining that it wasn't just about the width. The frame, muscles, and shape, all of it played an important role in the overall picture. That's why she confessed that when she saw Oppa, she realized he was perfect in that sense. And blushing, she apologized. Dojin got up from the table and sighed heavily. Despite her honesty, he decided she needed to be taught a lesson. Reaching for the hem of his hoodie, he started pulling it off. Yuju stared at him in shock, not understanding what he was doing. He looked at her seriously and said that he hadn't been joking last time, and reminded her that they had agreed, if it happened again, would pay her back in kind. The girl couldn't believe he was being serious, but Dojin gave her a stern look and said she had made a promise and had to honor their agreement. In truth, he hadn't planned to do anything like this. He just wanted to scare her a bit. Her behavior worried him, and he wanted her to understand she couldn't act like that, especially with strangers. It could get her into trouble. He thought he wouldn't give in to her pleas for forgiveness, but suddenly his eyes widened when something completely unexpected happened. Yuju grabbed the hem of her hoodie and pulled it off. He stood frozen, not believing she had actually done it. He had thought she'd just beg for forgiveness like before. He was so stunned he couldn't move, overwhelmed with embarrassment. His cheeks and ears turned red. He thought this girl had definitely lost her mind. He should scold her for being so reckless, but for some reason, he couldn't say a word. Yuju looked him in the eyes and asked if he was going to do it. Dojin knelt in front of her, and even though everything inside him screamed that this was wrong, he just exhaled. Then he leaned toward her and, as if under hypnosis, touched her neck to leave a mark, just like she had left on him. At some point, a thought crossed his mind. Why did Yuju, who had never paid him much attention before, now seem so different from the image of her he had in his head? He thought that he wished he could be the only one to see her like this. But then, he suddenly pulled away from her and was horrified by what he had just done. But to his surprise, Yuju wasn't scared of him at all. She started scolding him for overdoing it, saying that he only had marks on one side, while she had them on both. She was mad and said it wasn't fair, and that now he owed her. Dojin said she was right. The girl stared at his face and couldn't believe that her Oppa, who always walked around with such a serious and grumpy expression, could make such an adorable face. At some point, both of them realized that their silly standoff had ventured into uncharted territory, and they were both surprised and excited. Dojin stood up and began putting his hoodie back on, but the girl couldn't take her eyes off him. A tense silence hung between them, and the next moment he turned around and walked toward her. And just a second later, he pulled Yuju into a hug and kissed her. At that moment, a thought flashed through the girl's mind. They were in a dangerous situation, but she wasn't afraid at all. Being next to him made her feel so comfortable that she wasn't scared of anything that might happen between them. Dojin gave her a smile and said she was insanely beautiful. A little later, while the girl lay in his arms peacefully dozing off, Dojin suddenly realized that, in fact, he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. and that he had finally understood his true feelings for Juju. For some reason, he remembered an incident from school when a girl was hiding around the corner, crying bitterly. He had a guess as to why she was upset, so he followed her and stayed nearby, ready to protect and support her if necessary. Back then, he thought she was just a silly girl. Juju returned home after calming down and called out to her brother that she was home. Taeju suddenly asked where Dojin was, but the girl looked surprised and asked, why should she know where his friend was wandering? The next moment, a bag of groceries dropped on her head, and she let out a surprised yelp. She turned around and angrily asked what his problem was. The guy irritably said that he was her Oppa, and she shouldn't talk to him like that, then handed her the bag. Turning away, he headed for the door and told Taeju to hurry up so they could go to the internet cafe. The girl looked at the bag in confusion. Opening it, she saw only snacks and sweets inside and was surprised. It turned out Dojin had simply bought them for her. Taeju, noticing his sister examining the sweets, asked his friend why he had brought them. Dojin replied, just because. Standing by the elevator, the guy said he had heard that Dojin's older brother had already set a wedding date, and that Juju had cried for days after hearing the news. Dojin knew that Juju had a crush on his older brother, and that the news of his engagement had upset her. It wasn't surprising, but for some reason it bothered him. And although he had only just figured out his feelings, he realized that he had actually been in love with her for a very long time. So instead of continuing to hide his feelings or trying to comfort her with candy, he wanted to openly confess them to her. It was already dark outside. The moon shone high in the sky. Juju's eyes suddenly flew open, and for a few moments, she tried to grasp where she was and what had happened. Then she jumped up, horrified by the realization of what she and Dojin had done. Clearly, both of them had gone crazy. Then she noticed she was wearing his t-shirt. It was soft and smelled nice. The thought that Dojin had dressed her while she slept made her feel a bit embarrassed. Peeking quietly into the kitchen, she saw him standing at the stove. She didn't know how to behave around him now. After what had happened between them, she wasn't sure how he'd act. But the smell from the kitchen was so tempting. He cooked like a god, and she couldn't resist the urge to eat. Suddenly, Dojin turned around, having heard a rustle behind him, and smiled. Oh, you're up already? Juju didn't know what to expect from him and was surprised by how friendly he was. Then she froze as he walked toward her. In the next moment, his hand gently wrapped around her waist. He pulled her closer and kissed her lightly on the forehead. Juju, overwhelmed and confused by what was happening, looked at him with wide eyes. Dojin looked so sweet and gentle and said they could sit down and have dinner. She sat at the table while he set the plates and thought that this all felt strange and unfamiliar. He was acting like her boyfriend. When he sat down across from her, she thanked him for the dinner. The smell really was amazing. Juju felt so awkward, she might have run away from the table if the food hadn't smelled so good. The guy kept beaming with joy and smiling, saying she shouldn't drink outside the house anymore. Hearing this, the girl asked why she should promise him something like that. She kept thinking about how he kissed her forehead and the way he was treating her now. It was so unusual. She decided to clarify the situation and asked, what happened between us? Was that just a one-time thing? Dojin wasn't embarrassed at all. He smirked and asked what she was talking about. After everything that's happened between us, of course we're going to start dating. Juju froze, spoon in hand, not immediately processing what he had just said. She couldn't form a sentence in which the words him and her would go together with the word dating. She asked him, won't it be weird if we start dating? For the past 10 years, I've treated you like an older brother. And what would Taeju say? He didn't look confused or awkward. He simply said, there's nothing criminal about it. We're not even related. So why can't we date? As for your brother, we'll just tell him straight up. Juju looked at him, realizing he was right. What she liked most about this idea was that if they did date, his beautiful, broad chest would be entirely at her disposal. But then she dropped her head into her hands, remembering the one reason she wouldn't want to date Dojin. Because he was a crazy, possessive type. One time, she, her brother, and Dojin were drinking at a restaurant, and he admitted he'd be willing to do anything for his girlfriend. Taeju asked what he'd do if, after all his sacrifices, the girl cheated on him. Dojin, a bit flustered, said he'd try to make sure that never happened. When asked how, he said he'd cut off all her communication with other men. Taeju and Juju exchanged knowing glances and silently agreed that the guy was a total psycho. Taeju asked, "What about you? Will you also stop talking to all the women around you?" Without hesitation, his friend said, "Of course, I'll block them all, no discussion." Juju sipped her drink while listening to her brother argue with his friend. Her brother kept saying that Dojin wouldn't be able to isolate his girlfriend from the whole world, since she'd still go to work. But Dojin replied that it wasn't necessary at all. Hearing that, Taeju exclaimed, "You're not planning to lock the poor girl in the apartment, are you?" Juju, meanwhile, remembered how she used to wonder why such a handsome guy didn't have a girlfriend. But now she understood. Despite his charm and kind nature, he was just a possessive type. She had always thought he'd never have a girlfriend, and now she was horrified to realize that she had become that girlfriend. Dojin smiled cheerfully and asked what she was so deep in thought about. "You should eat before the food gets cold." Juju also thought there was no way he had asked her to date him because of feelings. It was more likely that he just felt responsible for what had happened between them. So she asked if it wouldn't be weird to start dating just because of that. Since they didn't have strong feelings for each other, it seemed more logical to go on a few dates first, and then decide about a relationship. She figured that if Dojin spent a bit more time with her, he'd realize they weren't compatible at all. Dojin's expression became unreadable, and he asked if she really considered relationships some kind of game. Was she mocking him? Then he gently took her hand in his and intertwined their fingers, holding her tightly. Juju felt goosebumps run down her body. His touch was so tender. She stared at him in surprise. Dojin brought her hand to his lips and left a light kiss, then said that it was she who came to him first, so she should take responsibility for what happened. Later, standing in the bathroom and looking at the marks on her arms, Juju thought that Dojin wasn't a dog, but her arms looked as if she'd been bitten by a rabid one. Her whole body was covered in marks, and she didn't know what to wear so no one would notice. The girl talked to herself while looking in the mirror, thinking about how Dojin had even demanded she take responsibility. Is this how relationships work? She wondered. A bit earlier, when she pulled her hand away from the guy, she declared that if he insisted so much, she would take responsibility. The guy looked pleased and happy and said that's exactly what he wanted. Blushing, the girl continued eating and thought he was really weird. But then, suddenly, she felt something and was surprised. Her cheeks flushed even redder, and she asked what he was doing. Didn't he realize that was her leg? Meanwhile, under the table, Dojin was slowly caressing her leg with his own. Smiling, the guy slightly pulled down the collar of his t-shirt, exposing his collarbones, and said that since she agreed to take responsibility, he was curious whether she wanted to explore the chest she was so interested in. At the sight of this, the girl even dropped her spoon, overcome with joyful anticipation. Then she realized she had fallen for her own weakness. If she hadn't been so obsessed with that damn sculpted chest, she wouldn't have given in so easily. So she said she needed to go to the bathroom. Suddenly, she felt his hand wrap around her waist. He stood behind her, holding her, and asked why she had been gone for so long. Then he gently touched her neck with his lips from behind, and a jolt of electricity seemed to run through her body. Juju enjoyed it, but it was also new and awkward to her, so she called him a pervert and told him to stop behaving like that. Dojin was surprised and asked why she was calling him that. Leaning on the sink, the girl scoffed and told him to look at all the marks on her body. The guy scoffed back and said he couldn't believe he was hearing this from someone like her. He lifted his t-shirt, showing the marks on his body, and said that between the two of them, she was the pervert. Just look at her handiwork. Juju pulled his shirt back down and said they both had class today and suggested they go to the university together. Annoyed, then asked him to stop seducing her. Dojin replied that he knew if he kept seducing her with his broad chest, she'd fall madly in love with him. And then, without letting her say a word, kissed her. The girl thought despairingly that because of him, she definitely wouldn't get enough sleep and would be late for class. The next morning, Juju actually managed to make it to university on time. She sat in the lecture hall, but her thoughts were far from the classroom. She wondered if Dojin could focus on his classes. Yesterday, he had been so obsessed with her. But today, surprisingly, he was acting quiet. Worried, she messaged him on Kakao. The guy replied that his class would end at 5:10 p.m., and the girl said she would also be free by then. Then he suggested they have dinner together and asked her not to leave without him. Juju smiled at the screen and thought the emoji he used looked so much like him. She was acting like a lovesick fool. A silly smile spread across her face, and she wondered if Dojin had always been this sweet. Juju's class ended a little earlier than expected, but she planned to wait for Dojin as they had agreed. Walking past two girls, she accidentally overheard them talking about how cherry-flavored lip balm made kissing even more enjoyable. Apparently, there's even a popular challenge now: putting on different flavored lip balms and having your boyfriend guess the flavor. Juju stopped, thinking it was interesting, but didn't want the girls to notice her eavesdropping. She began rummaging through her bag, thinking this was a great excuse to kiss her boyfriend again. Finally, she found her lip balm. Hers was strawberry flavored. She applied it to her lips, convincing herself it didn't mean anything and that her lips were just dry. Then she decided to hurry. She wanted to go to Dojin's class and surprise him, but didn't notice the guy walking past her. It was Sungmin. When he saw her, he immediately recognized the girl and, announcing, called her by name. But Juju didn't stop, so he grabbed her hand, pulling her closer to get her attention. He smiled and asked where she was rushing off to like that. The girl instantly recoiled from him as if he were fire, surprising the guy, and asked what the hell he thought he was doing. Shin Sung-min raised his hands and apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare her. He was just happy to see her. Juju looked at him warily. His overly friendly behavior made her uneasy, since they weren't that close. So she asked why he called out to her. The guy said he just wanted to ask how she got home. He didn't have her number and couldn't call to check on her. Then he asked if she'd give him her phone number. Juju didn't like this. She didn't want to be wrong, but it felt like he was flirting with her. The girl had no intention of doing that, so she said she was in a hurry and that she had a boyfriend. Sungmin was very surprised. He didn't give up and said he'd heard she was single, to which the girl replied that things had changed now. Suddenly, Go Dojin appeared behind her and called her name. The girl immediately smiled at him, as if clinging to a lifeline. Shin Sung-min gave him a contemptuous look. He didn't like that this guy was interfering in his business for the second time. Meanwhile, Dojin radiated a dangerous aura. It was clear he wasn't happy to see this guy around his girl again, but he tried to ask calmly and gently what Juju was doing here. Juju darted toward her boyfriend so quickly that Sungmin didn't have time to react. He wanted to stop her and talk a bit longer. The girl approached Dojin and, smiling, said it was time for them to leave. He looked at her strangely, clearly realizing something had just happened, but he didn't say a word. He simply exchanged a warning glance with Sungmin. He didn't like that this guy was near Juju again. Sungmin, in turn, was also unhappy to see Dojin. Then Dojin gently smiled and deliberately put his arm around the girl, saying they really should go now. The couple turned and walked away in each other's arms, leaving Sungmin stunned as he watched them go. He adjusted the brim of his cap and thought, what the hell is going on here? Earlier, she had said Dojin was like family, but now things looked very different. Juju buckled her seatbelt and heard Dojin say, with a hint of jealousy, that she sure was popular with guys. The girl was surprised and said it wasn't true at all. Dojin looked at her and said it was true, that she was very attractive, and many guys noticed her. Juju thought bitterly, finally I'm hitting a wall. His possessiveness. But even now it was hard for her to admit, and, she thought, none of this would be happening without Shin Sung-min. She worried that Dojin would switch into possessive mode, but suddenly felt his fingers slip into her hand, intertwining with hers in a quiet gesture. The girl blushed and asked, "Are you jealous of me?" And then the guy confessed that yes, he really was burning with jealousy over her. It took her a few moments to absorb what she'd heard, and surprisingly, she felt something pleasant from his confession. But then she laughed cheerfully and said it was strange. She'd never seen her Oppa like that. Dojin, indignant, asked what was strange about it. Wasn't it natural for him to be jealous of his girlfriend when another boy flirts with her? But Juju explained that for her it was strange, because they hadn't even really started dating yet, and he was already jealous. Despite years of friendship, this had never happened before, right? Then Dojin gave her a sly smile and said she had no idea. He'd actually begun being jealous of her over other guys a long time ago. The girl was shocked by his confession, her heart racing. She stared wide-eyed and asked, "What do you mean? Are you saying you've liked me for a very long time?" The guy blushed and lowered his gaze, answering that it was true and that he hadn't wanted to admit it to himself for a long time. But that's how it was. Juju couldn't believe he had just confessed his love. She felt joy and excitement. She began quickly asking how long ago he realized it, saying she had no idea of his feelings. She thought he only asked her out to take responsibility for what had happened between them. Dojin looked embarrassed, but admitted that he had liked her since high school. But he didn't want to admit it to himself, and was angry with his brother because of her, just because she liked him. The girl, shocked, covered her mouth with her hand. She could barely believe what was happening. For some reason, she'd never thought about her feelings for Dojin, but now she realized she had liked him too. The boy continued, saying it wasn't about responsibility. If it were, he would never have gotten involved with his friend's younger sister. Leaning closer, he declared that he'd had his own reasons to get close to her from the very start. Then he gently kissed Juju, and she felt warm feelings growing in her chest. She couldn't believe this was happening. He'd never shown his true feelings until today. And who would have thought he would torment the girl he liked for 2 whole weeks just because she touched his chest? So she pulled back and asked, "Are you expecting me to just believe you? Because until recently you had me making you coffee, waking you in the morning, and doing all these small errands." Dojin admitted that until that moment, he thought she was just drunk and touching people randomly. He was surprised that she was attracted to him specifically. Then he took her hand and said that now she could just touch his chest. That same chest she'd gone crazy about. As her hand rested on his chest, she suddenly asked, "Have you heard about the lip balm challenge?" Eventually, they went to the cinema and she felt strange. It meant they were really on a date. Dojin said he got her favorite combo, half salty, half caramel popcorn, and a cola, and asked if he'd got it right. Juju thanked him. He said he got the earliest movie tickets so their restaurant reservation wouldn't be missed. She said she was perfectly happy. She took a sip of cola and looked at Dojin's hands, thinking that since it was a date, they should hold hands. Suddenly, she heard his voice and feared he might be reading her mind. But unexpectedly, Dojin covered himself with his hands and bashfully asked her not to touch his chest in public. The girl was surprised and asked what he thought she was. She shouted that he was acting annoying and took a step forward. But then she stopped and said she took back her words and that she'd acted foolishly. Dojin smiled and asked what had come over her. She was so cute he felt his heart flutter. The girl got irritated again and told him to hurry up. Soon they were seated in the cinema hall. Juju sighed and ate popcorn. The romantic film was so boring she yawned throughout and thought they should have seen a thriller. To her surprise, Dojin was completely focused on the movie. She sighed and decided to at least enjoy her favorite popcorn and reached for the bucket, but her hand missed and bumped into something hard. Dojin smiled at her and asked, "What are you doing?" Juju was shocked, wondering if he'd gone insane. She'd barely touched him. In the next moment, he took her hand and said that if she wanted, they could leave early and spend some time together in the car. Okay, can we just talk about how insanely cute this manhwa is? Honestly, I was hooked from the start. Juju's stubborn, playful personality and Dojin's protective, slightly possessive side had me totally invested. Watching them go from teasing each other to confessing their feelings, absolute heart-melting moments. I loved seeing how their childhood connection and past experiences shaped their relationship. It just adds so much depth to the story. And the tension? Oh my gosh. The jealousy, the awkward moments, the little gestures like holding hands or a forehead kiss. It's all so sweet and realistic. I found myself smiling, laughing, and feeling all the butterflies right along with them. And can we just talk about their chemistry? Every glance, every touch, every playful tease. You feel like you're right there with them. If you love romance that's a mix of cute, flirty, jealous, and emotional moments, this is such a must-read. Seriously, I can't wait to see what happens next. You're gonna love it. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you won't miss any future recaps. And leave a comment down below. Let me know your favorite moment or what you think will happen next. I love reading all your thoughts.